part 2 of the shop overview. Today is the table. Welcome to BarrittWorks. As is obvious in this small space, and with a table that attempts to be all work surfaces and all tools, there is a transition that I have to implement anytime I move from routing to my version of fake jointing, to using the table saw, to using the chop saw, to even using the vise and the grinder. All of those things require a moment of preparation. They also pretty much require that the surface is kept clear so that you're not digging through a pile of crap every time you've got to make a change. I'm going to take you through a whole bunch of those changes. We will talk about them in more detail when and if there seems to be enough interest for any of them. So I'm starting with what might be the most fundamental for a wood shop, the table saw and its fence. My fence system, the golden rails are the rails that the fence system runs on. So I use the INCRA rail system. They have them in different sizes, and they have them both metric and in imperial. I have imperial. I keep these stored so that they are easily accessible. Doesn't mean it's entirely easy doing this. They weigh a little bit, but I wouldn't call it hard either. Since so many things happen in the table between one use to the next, usually fittings and screws won't be exactly in the position they were left. So there's usually a little bit of fiddling. This then moves on these rails between hard stops. Tighten the knobs down to lock it into place, but I just snug it up to begin with. Almost snug it up. And then bring the fence in line with one of the miter tracks. And I can do either miter track, depending on how I've mounted this. And then if this is not an extremely precise job, I can just, by feel, confirm that it is parallel with the miter track and then lock it in place. And if I'm doing something where real precision is required, I have a bit of machinist, a block of steel. It fits into the slot perfectly and allows me to move it along forward and back and see exactly if there's a gap or not. So at this point, this fence is now attached. There are locks to the rail if you need them, but the magic of it is that you bring it up to the blade, and this is a magnetic tape, so it can be shifted. As you reposition this and use this in different contexts, you reset the 0, and from that point on, if I want to cut something exactly to 6 inches, there's no messing around. I double check with a tape, but you can do repeatable, very precise cuts. This goes down to a 32nd. The rails themselves, if I loosen their supports, can slide a long way out beyond the table, come out to about here. That gives me enough space to get the fence back to run full sheets of plywood sideways through the blade, or basically just about anything I've needed to so far. When I'm done using the saw and using the fence, it gets reset to a mark so that I know it's going to fit on the wall hanging jig. Make sure it's not locked to the fence, lift it off, and put it back. So the router is buried in the table. Basically what I did on this top table surface is I routed the cutout that allowed this plate to hang in. And so the weight is all hanging just on this surface. There is a dust collection system on this. The plates that I use for the router are vented. And so there's a set of them because you'd want a plate that fits tightly around whatever size router bit you're using. But by them being vented, and they're held in with magnets, nothing unique about that, it allows the dust extraction to go down and out my dust system, not through a router fence. It works extremely well, not perfectly. You know, if you think about it, when you're routing some things, it might be a closed face down to the table, and the chips are getting thrown well away from the center space. It still captures a lot of chips even then, right from the point at where it cuts. It's remarkably effective, and most of my routing happens without a major mess. That has been a really good system. But what do I do if I want a router fence as I'm working? Again, it takes a few moments, it takes a transition. But I can install from either side, and even from the end, but I usually do it from this side, one of my INCRA positioning fences. And so I reuse essentially the same system. I'm just going to set that aside. If I was doing real work, obviously I would put that somewhere. But this is the main housing of an INCRA arm. And I've got a smaller arm that I've mounted a custom router fence. Actually, I've modified slightly a router fence from INCRA. And so I've got the INCRA arm, I've got an 80-20 extrusion, some particle board spacers, and then the actual INCRA arm that can open up, so you've got different size openings for different router bits, and has the ability to have stops that slide out. They get stored separately just because of the way they hang in the rack. At some point, I'm going to improve this so I don't need to take them apart. But I've got T-nuts already in the rack. If they get moved, they're marked so I can reposition them. Screw this into place, and I've added brackets to it, which allow me to use the same knobs that fasten the table saw fence. And so now that is a very solid mounting. And then the router fence slides into that, and we've got essentially the same system that we had for the table saw. Repositionable, repeatable, resettable scale router table fence. Now, when I want the fence here, I grab the bigger crossbars, do the same routine where it slides in to that housing, and then the fence is here. And that's the traditional position here, facing you as you're standing at the router. And I've done that quite a bit when I've had bigger projects. When I'm doing just a little bit of routing where I want a repeatable fence, I'll do it from the side, and it works fine. When I'm done, you reverse it, put it away. Everything has its spot on the pegboard. These pieces on the frame of the table, they're what create the recess, the 3/4 inch recess that these top pieces sit between. And they are part of this one flat surface. These pieces can come off wherever they might need to, so that I can then bolt on table extensions. And I've got a whole set of table extensions that are stored out in the wood storage area, so that when this table is being used for much longer work pieces, I can extend it, even opening the door at the end of the shop if necessary. Or if the table is turned sideways, I've run it with the wings going off in both directions. So I take these extrusions that form the well that the tabletops sit in, I take any number of them off for a variety of reasons now and then. The chop saw was already out on the table. And the reason it was already on the table is the general principle for the chop saw, sometimes even the table saw fence, less often for that, is that I leave it in whatever position it was in at the end of a project, because I don't know what's coming next. If I do know, and it needs to be out of the way, that's different. So this chop saw is out here because that's where it was when I last used this. And I'll just show you something before I show you how it goes away. The dust system in the room uses this 4-inch flexible Rockler hose, and it's actually extremely large, long I mean. And so I can get it anywhere in the room. I've stretched it probably 2/3 of its length there. So each tool has a 4-inch port, and in this case, because this moves, I need to trap this in place so that I have the ability to use the saw without it fighting me too much. This goes onto the back of the table saw. This goes onto the back of the router exhaust system I mentioned. It goes onto the exhaust from the sander and belt sander. It goes on to the exhaust from this little bandsaw. You get the idea. So this system, one hose. Now it's not unique at all. Plenty of shops do this. We probably all find our own way to store the hose and how to kind of manage it. So when I'm done with this and I need the table surface, what do? It lives just below. There are 2 screws that have kind of permanently marked positions, easily managed with just your fingers. Now it's just sitting there on the frames. Lift it up. Pause for a moment to extend these locks on the feet that used to grip the mobile stand that came with this saw originally. Slide it into place. At that point, we've got this great big hole in the top of the table. The table pieces live stored in the table. Everything is pretty precisely set. Pretty easy to reinstall. I could use this unbolted. I've really never done that. Again, T-nuts that are pre-positioned have been in this spot for a decade and pretty much hold their location. That's it. As solid as anything else on the table. And as always in this system, everything gets put away as much as possible as you go. When I want to cut up a sheet of plywood, some kind of sheet stock, or maybe do some cutting with a jigsaw. I obviously don't want to be cutting right on the surface. So what I set up is these 2x4s, a set of 2x4s with dowels already placed that I can put out on the surface when I need them. And all 4 of them, if I'm cutting a full sheet, I might just put out 2 if I was working with something smaller. And looks like I put this. So you can obviously put them in different positions if you were needing a little greater distance. Now I can go ahead and run a circular saw across some stock. It will make slight nicks in the top of the surface. These are in essence sacrificial. Or maybe do some cutting with a jigsaw. And then I put it away again when I'm done. I should talk about all the holes in the top of this table. Many of you will recognize them dog holes for bench dogs, but in a traditional woodworking table, it's much thicker than this surface. And bench dogs, which are just these simple steel rods with a curved surface on the top, you drop them into the hole, and when you push up on that extension, they lever a little bit and lock in place. This surface is too thin. It's only 3/4 of an inch. Bench dogs would not work well. So what I have instead are modified Irwin quick clamps. And so this side, the rubber jaw has been removed. If you look at one before it's been modified, you've got jaws on both sides. Cut that off, this plastic, with a hacksaw, and you end up with bare metal. And then clamp it in a vise, heat it with a torch, and grab it with a big pair of pliers. And when it gets soft enough, give it a 90-degree twist and a bend. It wasn't my idea, I got it from the internet. The end result is, I'm going to say, magical and inexpensive. So I can clamp something at a moment's notice wherever I want. Multiple clamps if that's required. And now I could cut this off, for example. That keeps me from pulling the vise out and putting it on the table. Or it allows me to clamp workpieces in any of 100 different ways as I'm doing various work. Just this accounts for a lot of what makes this table surface really work well. The ability to clamp at a moment's notice anywhere in the surface is golden. I should talk a little bit more about the structure of the table and the systems that are built into the table. So it's an 80/20 aluminum frame, as I mentioned at the beginning of the first video, with wooden height adjustable legs, which are a design of my own, working in collaboration with a friend who has a machine shop. And he and I spent an afternoon cutting aluminum and making plans and creating pucks which had the right threads to fit the threaded rods that we're using as lifting bars. And the table has at each corner, these holes are not like the other dog holes. These actually connect to the shaped top of these threaded rods. And so when I loosen the lock knurled knobs on the table leg, I can now raise it and lower it. And I think it might have been around 10 inches of lift. I haven't taken it all the way up for a while. And so the table can become substantially lower than it is right now, but also quite a bit higher, almost to the point where it's a comfortable full table height where it's up close to. More importantly, it can get leveled when it's turned or moved in a slightly different position. So all 4 legs are of that design. And then the center of the table has its own vacuum system. So when I am working and when the power to the table is turned on, and I've just drilled something, created a bunch of sawdust that wasn't collected in the big dust collection system. This has a remote switch on it. So instead of doing what we've all done, you've just drilled something, you need to see the hole, and you give it a blow, and the dust goes out into the shop and just adds to the crap in your shop. Instead, after I drill the hole, I've gotten out of the habit of blowing dust out of the way because this is always within easy reach. Again, a Rockler flexible hose, this reaches anywhere in the shop, yet pulls itself back to be out of the way. So I drill the hole, need to see, do that, hang it here in the rail or put it back where it lives down below and go about my business. That system consists of 2 5-gallon buckets. One bucket has a top that acts as a cyclone separator, and the other bucket is a Lowe's 5-gallon bucket vacuum. And they're a simple vacuum pump that just latches onto the top of a 5-gallon bucket. Those are hung into the table so that they move with the table. They can be lifted out to be emptied if they need to be, or cleaned. Let's talk about this little tiny hole. Actually, I can't resist the urge to show instead of tell in this instance. Okay, I've just installed the blade there. turn the power off, I have a jigsaw permanently mounted on the underside of the table surface. I, of course, can use a handheld jigsaw when that's more appropriate, but there are times when I just want to be able to run things past a blade that isn't moving. I do need to constrain the blade better, and at some point I'm going to give it the same kind of wear blocks that you've got on bandsaws and build it into this surface so that the blade has a little bit less ability to move. So the table has power divided into two circuits. One circuit drives the outlet strips here on the front legs, and the other circuit drives the outlet strips on the back legs, as well as some of these master switches that control individual tool stations. Two heavy-duty power cords go out to the table. One goes straight into an outlet. The other goes into this switcher box, so when it senses enough of a draw, that triggers the dust collection fan to engage. Here in the front of the table, these master switches for each workstation. Green button turns it on, red button turns it off, and it's a big button you can slap. You can also hit it with your leg if your hands are full, if you're busy holding something. Same thing for the mounted jigsaw. And the one that I used, actually the table saw and this one are the ones that are most helpful to me. Much better than fiddling for any other switch. And so when I'm done routing something, if my hands are busy, I can just hit that. The back side of the table is much simpler. It's just the power strips, and these do trigger the dust system. Okay, crosscut sled. Now, of course, the riving blade is a bit in the way when using a crosscut sled, and I make sure the table is off before I start messing with the blades. So, as in all of these systems, it's a bit of a pain. There are transitions, they take a moment. And all those moments add up to making jobs take longer in the shop than they would in a bigger shop. By taking that off, I gain another 2 or 3 inches of travel on my crosscut sled. This lives at the far end of the pegboard fan from the table saw fence. It's not really any lighter. This piece locks it from sliding beyond a certain stop point in each direction. There's a channel on the underside of the table saw that works with just providing that stop front and back. Drop the table saw into the slot, it drops automatically onto that post, and now it has a hard stop front and back. And if you'll notice, this crosscut sled does not have a back fence. It's a hybrid design. I got this idea from somebody else. But what that allows me to do is to put very large pieces on here that I need to flip over to do the second part of the cut, or that are just unwieldy in one way or another. That vertical fence at the end is this great constraint that makes crosscut sleds small workpiece only. This crosscut sled can go with big pieces. Now, I originally designed extensions to it, but that really is not necessary. If I have something big on here, it's clamped down. I can put blocks on the table to support things so they don't droop. An aluminum extrusion fence. This is a removable centerpiece, and so that is in bevels, and I've got a library of them. So if you're doing an angled cut, you don't have to permanently have cut into your crosscut sled. I swap out the centerpiece, put in a fresh one or one that's been used on that angle before, and then angle the blade, and I can do angled cuts on here with the crosscut sled not being permanently modified. I've got a protection area back here that encloses the blade. I have not built a cage around it, and I'm not sure I really need to. But quite frankly, the crosscut sled could probably be a video on its own, and if there's enough interest, I will do that. Quite a bit of planning went into it, but once I put it together, it's just worked. It's been great. The planer is not an interesting or involved install, but it does weigh a ton. Actually, I believe it weighs something in the order of 100 pounds. And except for a bit of anticipation, that really is not a hard transition. It's heavy enough that I generally don't bolt it down in any way. Install its in-feed and out-feed trays, put the exhaust on, which feeds right into the 4-inch system, And this particular planer, the Dewalt 735, has a very strong exhaust fan already. Coupled with the 4-inch exhaust system, it is weird to plane pieces remove a lot of material and have very little chips come out of the machine. If you think of a planer normally creating these mountains of chips, this setup just doesn't do it. I've got a digital height gauge on it, but pretty much use it as standard. So it's out here for as long as it needs to be, gets coiled up, and then with a little bit of care, move back down. In a similar vein, when I need to use a vise, I have to do this routine. And so if you think about it, you go to your vise in your shop all the time, at a moment's notice. You just need a nut held more firmly as you're trying to free it from something, or you need to grind or cut on something. So we move back and forth to using a vise quickly and fluidly, constantly. So you can imagine it's a little bit of a pain to go through that much of a transition. And there's two ways you can think of it. That didn't take long. We'll keep this video in real time as I set that up. But when you just want to step over to the vise, use it, move away, you can't quite do that. So one of the trade-offs of such a small shop. And again, I'm using the built-in T-tracks to allow me to flexibly clamp something in whatever position I need at that moment. And then this goes back. And no need to go through it, but same process for the grinder. So the table is clear, and the next thing I'm going to do in here, now I'm pulling from a storage shelf that's one level below where the hard surfaces live. This is old carpet padding from a carpet we tore up after a flood. Next thing that happens in here is I'm going to build a Prusa Core 1 kit. And so I'm going to leave this in the clean setup, and I put the soft surface on it. And as I work, I will keep and collect small parts on these trays and do the work here. So you will see this shop next in the Core 1 build. There will be much more shot here as I'm doing particular work. If I think of things that I think would be of particular interest, I will do detailed videos on some of the systems that I've shown here very briefly. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and help us get this new channel off the ground, and I'll see you next time.